Coming up on this edition of Press Watch 2012, media bias, what this taboo term even means, and how it's been a factor in the decline of public trust. Rising to the challenge or on the attack, are reporters going too far in their search for the truth? And later, Press Watch's bravos and blunders, what comedian is turned off by post-debate discussions of women, and what PBS reporter got it right. And speaking of debates, we'll tell you what media website post is anything but sober. Welcome to Press Watch 2012. I'm Rachel Morse. Press Watch is a production of the Mass Communications Department at Oklahoma City University, made possible by the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. We're looking at national news media coverage of the presidential campaign and the news media in light of ethical guidelines within the professional journalism community. And today we are privileged to have our two guests, Dr. Robin Myers, Professor of Rhetoric here at Oklahoma City University for the past 11 years, I believe, an award-winning commentator for the National Public Radio. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Michael Dean, Public Relations Director for the Oklahoma Historical Society, with extensive background in both TV and radio. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and we're going to go ahead and start off our show with media bias, this wonderful taboo term in TV. You know, people don't normally in the TV business don't like hearing that. It's kind of a thing that makes you squirm a bit. But we were wondering, whenever we were discussing this, what this term even means. You know, people throw this around a lot of times to attack the media, and they don't really know what they're saying. So we got a definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and what they said is that media bias is an inclination of temperament or outlook, especially a personal and sometimes unreasoned judgment. So with that definition, I think we're going to go ahead and take a look at our first graphic, which is a Gallup poll entitled, "Distrust in the Media Hits a New High." And I think people could guess that it's hit an all-time high. People are very skeptical when it comes to the media. But in this poll, what it says is, as of 2012, the distrust of the media is at an all-time high, with 60% of responders saying that they have little or no trust in the mass media. So I want to go ahead and, Dr. Myers, I want to address you first with this question, since you've had extensive background when it comes to persuasive language. When it comes to the media having some form of bias, what do you think this is applying to, and how is this being used out of context? You know?
Well, I think in my own lifetime, I've gone from Walter Cronkite, this sort of trusted figure who would give the news and then say, that's the way it was, Sunday, September 12th, whatever, 1963. And people were expected to get a report of what happened in the world and then make up their own mind about what that meant for their lives. Now with cable, with hundreds of cable channels, the need to get people not to pick up the remote and change the channel, everyone has to be aiming their news programming at a certain constituency. So if you are conservative, you get to tune in to Fox, and lo and behold, you will hear all the things you already knew were true before you tuned in. And if you're more liberal, you tune into MSNBC, lo and behold, you hear all the things you already knew were true. So we have this incredible segmentation of the population, all tuning in to get the news they want rather than the news they need. So it's not surprising that the polls show this drop in credibility.
Yeah, and I want to follow up with that. When it comes to persuasive language, what do you think that the media is saying that's making this type of drastic difference in trust?
The media is saying, we have a product for you that you know that you want, and we're going to blur the line between objective news reporting and entertainment so you won't switch the channel, so that you will get delivered to you what you've come expecting, rather than what perhaps you need to hear about the world.
And Mr. Dean, you've had extensive experience when it comes to both TV and radio. What have you personally observed when it comes to media bias, if anything?
I think in the years that I was a news director in Oklahoma and in Kansas, there was a gradual shift, a gradual change, and it was more evident to me in television than it was in radio, in that ownership of stations were changing, and instead of broadcasters owning broadcast stations, gradually corporations were owning stations, and they had a particular agenda that they wanted to follow, and so they started directing the programming on their stations and directing certainly the news on their stations toward the agenda that they were pursuing. We didn't see that quite as much in radio then. I think it's true now in radio as well. But it was a gradual transformation that began in the earlier mid-1980s with corporate buyouts and that sort of thing. At least that was my impression.
Yeah, so you're saying that it has a lot to do with production, with trying to make money. Is the news industry shifting in that way?
It is. I think it is. Originally, you had broadcasters who owned radio stations and television stations. And the broadcaster lived next door to a car dealer. He owned a car dealership and he was selling cars. And back to the broadcaster, that was his station. He was a part of that community, that city, that state, and he felt a responsibility to his viewers, to his listeners, in the case of newspapers, to their readers, to provide the best possible coverage of all of the local news, all of the local things going on that he possibly could. When corporations started buying stations, they were looking at the bottom line. They were buying those stations because they represented profits. And because they were corporations and because they had many different things that they were involved in, businesses that they were involved in, they could use their stations to promote a business. An example that I have read, and I don't know how true this is, when General Electric bought out NBC and MSNBC, they started heavily promoting healthcare. In fact, they had a website that was dedicated totally to healthcare news and that sort of thing. One of the largest divisions of the General Electric company is their medical manufacturing division. So they certainly had something to promote, and that's what they were trying to do, I think.
And whether it's promoting a business or, your own opinion, we've definitely seen an increase of that. But what's interesting is when we're talking about bias, a lot of people point that towards the mass media. Well, what does that even mean? What is the mass media? You have so many forms of communication, right? So I want to go ahead and bring up our second graph, which is a Pew study entitled "Cable Leads the Pack as Campaign News Source." Now, we have a lot of people who are complaining about a biased media, but when you talk about cable, this is where your opinion shows come in. This is where you have people with very specific opinions. So I want to go ahead and address you again, Mr. Dean. What connection do you think this consumption of the media has to do with people's perception of bias?
It's exactly as Dr. Myers just mentioned a moment ago, the diversification of the media. You have the mainstream media on the local standard television stations, and you have cable media. You also have Twitter and Facebook and all these other social media sites, but people who are going to cable news are going to typically watch what they want to watch. If they may watch MSNBC, they may watch CNN, they may dislike Fox, or they may love Fox but they hate MSNBC, and so what they're watching they may not think is biased, but the other ones are biased, regardless of where they are in the spectrum. And I think that may be where some of this discord comes from.
And I want to go ahead and keep this discussion going, but we'll take a quick break and then we'll talk more about what we're finding on cable news exactly. Coming up on Press Watch, reporters trying to cut through the spin. When is it done right, and when is the interference and opinion play? That's next. Welcome back to Press Watch 2012, where we're looking at the national news media and ethics, how it all works during the presidential election. Still with us, we are fortunate to have Dr. Robin Myers, thank you so much for sticking around, Professor of Rhetoric at OCU, as well as Mr. Michael Dean, Public Relations Director for the Oklahoma Historical Society. Thank you both so much for staying with us. We're excited about this next topic that we're going to go into. We were just talking about cable, and on cable we have a lot of opinions going on, but we also have straight news. So what we kind of want to distinguish between is when reporters are challenging the people that they're interviewing and when it's kind of turning into attack. So our first clip, we have Soledad O'Brien and former we've got Giuliani too on talking points on CNN. So I want to go ahead and play this clip and just kind of get y'all's reaction from it.
He's even saying that after weeks it would be even talking about weapons of mass destruction. It took years before they were even able, and they still don't have the right answer, that by jumping on so quickly and expecting sort of accurate final answers within weeks is I guess unfair in a way.
This is what?
Well, I'm saying he's
so
saying
we're going to blame this on Bush too. We're going to blame.
Okay,
in other words,
you got to stop putting words in my mouth, sir.
Okay.
Seriously, hang on. Let me finish. Because every time I ask you a question,
I want to answer the question.
I'm going, and let me finish my point. Every time I ask you a question, you like to push back as if somehow the question that's being posed to you is unfair. It's not. I'm a journalist. You said some things. I'm trying to get some accurate responses from you. You are welcome to answer. Go ahead.
Well, yeah.
And what was his answer?
This is the problem when journalism gets confused with entertainment, and when journalists become the sort of object, the center of the attention, and conceive of themselves as being the ones pushing the agenda rather than just asking the questions. I really thought, irregardless of what one thinks about these two people or the position of the issue being discussed, I thought she was sort of over the top in the way she asked it. She should have just asked the question and let him answer.
Absolutely. And clearly she was angry because she was trying to ask a question that she didn't feel was being addressed. And Mr. Dean, where could she have gone right in this situation? What would have been a better response?
I think if she had, she was visibly angry. If she had been able to control her emotions and phrase a question less confrontational, she may have been able to get the answer from Mayor Giuliani that she was looking for. And I kind of wonder, does that not go back to the Mike Wallace days on 60 Minutes when he would do what was called ambush journalism? And we thought he was confrontational then, but what he was doing then, I think in the early 1970s, mid 1970s, pales and is nothing compared to what we're seeing today, not just on CNN, but on the other cable networks as well. I think that she needed to control her emotions, and she needed to formulate the question in a non-confrontational way.
And it kind of blurs the line between something that's supposed to be a straight news program and not necessarily just an opinion show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to go ahead and play our next clip, which we have Andrea Mitchell and Governor Sununu on MSNBC. So let's go ahead and play that and see what you guys think.
What people saw last night, I think, was a president that revealed his incompetence, how lazy and detached he is, and how he has absolutely no idea how serious the economic problems of the country are.
Governor, I want to give you a chance to maybe take it back. Did you really mean to call Barack Obama, the President of the United States, lazy?
Yes, I think you saw him admit it the night before when he delivered the pizzas. He said, you know, they're making me do this work. He didn't want to prepare for this debate. He's lazy and disengaged.
I think that there certainly was a performance issue there, and whether or not he was in his best form last night, a lot of people are questioning that. Just the one-on-one against Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney turned in a very strong performance, but I think to call the president lazy and disengaged is another whole question.
I saw you both smiling at that one too.
That's a really interesting clip, because I think she asked an appropriate follow-up question. She said, did you mean to call the President of the United States lazy, or were you talking about his performance, not him personally? He went on and said, yes, I meant to call him lazy. What I think she should have done at that point is say, I think that comment speaks for itself, or we'll leave it at that. But she then launched into a defense, a kind of angry defense, and that's where I think journalists step over the line. They ought to let the people they're talking to indict themselves if they're going to do that.
What are your thoughts, Mr. Dean?
Well, I think, first off, when they book guests like that on shows like that, they know what they're going to get. And what they got was exactly what they expected, exactly what they wanted. I absolutely agree with Dr. Myers that blurs the line between being a journalist and being an entertainer or doing op-ed. And I think we're seeing more of that on the cable channels. And so I think people, when they watch the cable channels, they need to know that's what they're going to get.
And there's a thing in our society that we have to sort of let come to the surface, and that is that we like to watch people get into fights. I mean, we have people voted off the island, and we have people who make it Dancing with the Stars and don't. There's this constant conflict theme running through entertainment, and the more journalism becomes entertainment, the more of those kinds of cultural problems are going to soak into what we're doing as journalists, and it's just unfortunate.
What would you call this, entertainment or news?
I would call it a combination, but it is tending toward entertainment, and as it trends toward entertainment, it becomes more biased, less authentic. More of the questions become about trapping people or getting them to say something stupid, or just have people get into a fight, which apparently we enjoy.
And it brings ratings, and that's why
and you don't switch the channel. You'll switch to somewhere where there is a fight going on, which is more exciting, apparently. So.
Absolutely.
Where's Maury Povich
when we need him? Yeah, right.
Would you say it's a vicious cycle because we're wanting media who aren't biased,
Right?
But we like watching this,
right?
Which is a biased media.
If ratings are the idea, then of course it becomes a race to the bottom, as it were. When there were 3 major TV stations and public television, people could pick among a very small number of choices and get their news. Now that they can pick among hundreds of different possible venues, then they're going to target segment according to their appetites and desires and so forth. And so you have to play to your base, exactly the way politicians play to their base. So once you do that, the world becomes less and less objective and more about sort of complete bias in the way you deliver information.
And I miss those days. I miss the days of watching channels 4, 5, and 9 in Oklahoma City, and it didn't matter which station you were watching, you were going to get the news. And it was not news with a slant or whatever. And the same with the networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. You're going to get the same stories reported by different reporters, but the same stories with no slants, no biases, whatever. And I miss those days, and I'm not sure we'll ever go back to that.
And it makes a very passive consumer of the news, because if you are getting what you went looking for, it's like going to a restaurant and ordering the same thing every time off the menu. You think, yeah, I knew I liked that to begin with. I'm a meat eater, or I'm a vegetarian, or I'm a Fox News person, I'm an MSNBC person. There becomes a kind of mental laziness that kicks in. If you're watching some objective news source, you have to make up your own mind about what that particular story says about the president or a congressman or something. Otherwise, people are telling you what it means. And you're saying, yeah, that's what I thought it meant. No, you weren't thinking at all.
And those other guys at that other channel, they don't know what they're talking about.
Exactly. Well, I want to go ahead and pull up the Radio Television Digital News Association Code of Ethics. We got a little piece of that under the section of integrity, and we were talking about this before the show started. And what they say is that journalists should clearly label opinion and commentary. Is this being done? It's a code of ethics, so it's kind of a suggestion. But how can we go? We can't go back, but how can we improve upon what's being done right now? Mr. Dean, either one.
I'm holding in my hand right now the Code of Ethics that you just mentioned, but an earlier Code of Ethics, the Radio Television News Directors Association published a Code of Ethics, and it's not quite a full page. And it simply says that we would strive to present the news accurately, honestly, and impartially. How difficult should that be? It took 3.5 pages for the Code of Ethics that you were showing us, and then I also printed up the Code of Ethics for the Public Relations Society of America, and they're 13 pages long, but they all say the same thing. Report the news, do your job in a truthful, honest, ethical manner. And in terms of labeling, the shows that we see on Fox, MSNBC, and CNN, I would think would be a good idea. I think that people today don't really understand, or they miss the connection between this is a news story and this isn't.
Well, because we live in a celebrity culture, for one thing. So on local news, once you do a My 2 Cents segment, then all of a sudden the newscaster becomes the commentator. Now, at least they they put it up there as commentary,
at
so
least
you can
labeled.
pay attention to it or not. But the idea that we should care what a newscaster thinks about something is a strange idea. It's again the newscaster becoming the center of the story. And I don't like it when a newspaper puts an endorsement for a candidate on the front page. That's also a sort of a journalistic no-no. Turn to the opinion page if you want to see what the paper thinks you should do in terms of voting. All those lines are getting blurred all the time now, and we can't even tell the difference between news and commentary.
Exactly. It's a blurred line, and like you were saying before, Mr. Dean, I don't know if we'll ever go back from that. But this is good transition to go to our next block, which is exciting. We've got lots more great things to talk about when it comes to the media. So coming up next on Press Watch, this segment we do every week called Bravos and Blunders, the best and worst we've seen in political journalism. And we're not the only ones looking. Jon Stewart gave his 2 cents on what not to say when talking about women's reactions to the debates. But we found coverage worthy of a bravo. And what post on CNN's website earned a big thumbs down from some? Stay with us. Welcome back to Press Watch 2012. It's time now for Press Watch's Bravos and Blunders, example of the best and worst we've seen in journalism recently, which we'll discuss with Dr. Robin Myers, professor at OCU, and Mr. Michael Dean, PR director for the Oklahoma Historical Society. Thank you both so much for staying with us.
Thank you.
I love this part. I absolutely love this part, so I cannot wait to show you this one clip. We've been digging around trying to see the best and worst, but we had help from Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. One thing that we saw was a lot of people talking about women after the second presidential debate. So I'll go ahead and play the clip and let you guys see what we're talking about.
But not that it mattered anyway, because apparently during this debate, the ladies had already left the building.
It was just too much testosterone, like two roosters going at each other. That could turn off women.
One thing women voters don't like is a bully.
As a turnoff for women.
A lot of women in America, I'm not sure they're going to be turned on by this debate.
A lot of women turned off by that.
I wonder if suburban women were turned off.
Interesting, and I want to play this next clip before we go into that discussion, and I can't wait to discuss this with you guys. But we wanted to find somebody who did it right. So we had a PBS reporter who, in our opinion, when we watched her, I wasn't turned off by what she said. So let's go ahead and watch.
A couple different things. They were not all that interested in the response that the president gave about how Mitt Romney and George W. Bush were different, whereas that really trended on Twitter. A lot of partisans were very exercised about that. And also they were very frustrated by the working of the ref with Candy Crowley and talking to her about not being enough time. That's what women did not like to see tonight.
And I think what she did that was different is there was specific language that a lot of these reporters used in the clip that Jon Stewart referenced. So I just kind of want to talk with you both about that. I think you were about to say something,
Well,
Dr. Myers.
Part of the problem with the 24-hour news cycle is that every minute thing has to be stretched to fill time. So you end up talking about the body language, which is not unimportant, but you make it into this huge thing, and then that backfires on you. And as far as Jon Stewart's concerned, if my students hear me say something about what was on The Daily Show or Colbert, they're right with me. So we live in a society in which real news is so fake that it's fake news shows that students are watching to get real news. So that we could do a whole show on that.
Exactly.
But that's the problem. That's the problem with we make and everything's breaking news. Even if it's a monkey that's wandered away in Florida and is loose, it's breaking news. So it's like the boy who cried wolf. Everyone begins to pay no attention to the sort of hyperbolic rhetoric of news because everything's a breaking story. Everything is huge, and people know that is not true.
Absolutely. Mr. Dean, when it comes to women being turned off, what do you think the appropriateness level is of that language when it's used?
I don't think it's appropriate. How do you prove women are turned off 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 60 seconds after a debate? Where's your research? Where are the facts in this? So I just, it says, Dr. Myers says you have to fill time and you have to look at every little microscopic thing that was done, that was said, and then turn it into the days, the hours, the minutes' biggest giant story.
I also think it diminishes women to have such a narrow view of what they were paying attention to.
It's almost like putting them in a box.
You can do that with any of the population segments.
Absolutely, absolutely. What difference did you guys see between the clips that Jon Stewart presented and the PBS reporter? What could they have done better when they were discussing women? Either one.
They, where to begin?
Yeah.
They could have taken the comments that the president and the two candidates were making, the comments that they made that were specific to women, and talk about those comments, but without adding in that this turned women off, this might have turned women off, this was good, this was. How do you know? Yeah. There, I think, was a professional way and an ethical way to do that, and they didn't.
Well, and just the language turn off and turn on is unfortunate. I mean, that's just not the language you want to use.
Something else behind that. Yeah. Well, I want to go ahead and go to our blunder for this for this show. This is my favorite thing to look at. Okay, so CNN, professional news site. After there have been a lot of drinking games, this is true of just about anything now in today's culture, a lot of drinking games have been trending and going around. Well, CNN decided that they wanted to go ahead and go with it. So for the second presidential debate, they posted up on their website an official CNN drinking game. And the only caveat in this game, which was tongue-in-cheek, is that it said pick your favorite beverage, be it wheatgrass or whiskey. And some of the rules in this presidential debate hydrate, included taking a sip if the candidate mentions middle class, and I think sip stands for something else probably, chugging for the duration of the handshake, and sipping each time a candidate says the American people.
Well, I put this on their website.
On their website, yes.
Again, this is entertainment. This is something to make watching the debate, which might otherwise be boring to lots of people, more fun because people get drunk. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. That sort of diminishes the whole credibility of the idea of reporting important news to people.
It certainly shows, I think for some people, it shows their news value or their lack of sense of news value.
Right.
And you know why they're putting this on there? It's because eyeballs are going to go here.
Yeah.
People are going to click on this.
It's a fun, funny thing, but it's not news. And I think it takes away from their website as a news website. That would belong on the Lost Ogle.
Well, yeah. Why would we think the ratings for news are going down when we look at this?
Yeah, exactly.
We should know why they're going down.
Exactly.
Yes, and then asking, what do you remember from the debate?
Right. I can't remember anything from the debate because I took too many sips every time
too many
middle
sips,
class
too many
was mentioned.
My wheatgrass was just too much for me.
Right.
Where do you draw the line? If news networks are starting to post things like drinking games on their websites, where does it end?
Well,
I'm not sure I want to know where it ends.
I don't know, but I think as consumers we have the ultimate power to switch to a more legitimate source of news. And until the ratings change, I mean, we are all consumers. So we all encourage the wrong behavior by consuming the wrong behavior. So ultimately we have to make these decisions as consumers of news and just turn it off if it's gotten silly.
That's how you affect change in the broadcast industry or any other kind of industry. Is if you don't buy the product's going to go away.
Right.
The manufacturer is going to figure out that this is the wrong thing to do. In the case of CNN or the case of the broadcast networks, they'll figure out at some point people are not watching their shows, people are not going to their websites.
Right.
And so something needs to give.
And we all say we hate negative ads. You ask anybody on the street, what do you think of all these negative ads? Oh, they're terrible. You know why there's so many negative ads? Because they work.
And they remember them, and they know which ones are terrible because they can tell you.
So as long as the drinking game is working, I suppose we'll have the drinking game.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a sad reality, but it is a reality that we have to live with. Well, I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show today. We had a great show. Thank you both so much for your expertise and being willing to talk to us today. That's it for this episode of Press Watch. Thank you both to our guests for coming today and joining us on the show. Press Watch is a production of Oklahoma City University in partnership with the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. We'll do this again next week. See you then.